everybody. Welcome everyone to our second session in the family partnership strand. I hope you were able to attend the first session. It was really wonderful. I'm Kathleen Strickland-Cohen, and I'm here today with Sarah Pfeffer, Ashley Toma, and Amanda Foley, who will introduce themselves further as we get going today. But our focus today is going to be on enhancing family-school communication and partnering with families of students with Tier 2 needs. So you've already seen the expectations multiple times. I'm not going to go over those again, but I do want to just point out this piece here because of the number of folks yesterday in the initial session who said they were feeling overwhelmed. Just make sure that you are taking care of yourself and taking breaks as needed. You're all here, so I don't feel like we need to go over the how to get to your agenda piece of things. I did want to point out, however, that to make general comments in the chat is fine. Talk to one another, that's just fine. But if you have questions that you want us to address or hoping that we might address after the session today, then please put those in the Q&A section under the polls tab. And if you do accidentally navigate away for some reason and have a hard time coming back, please refer to those at the help desk, because I don't know that any of us would have the bandwidth right now to help you or try to figure that piece out. Although we do have a tech assistant today that will be helping. So let's just jump in. Our learning objectives for today, we want to define the critical features of family-school partnership and what we mean by that. Discuss some research that we've been working on separately, different research studies that we've been working on, looking at strengthening partnership with families of students with Tier 2 behavior support needs, and then describe how one district is implementing evidence-based strategies to enhance family-school partnership for students who support or require support beyond Tier 1. So as I said, I'm going to start my timer today because I want to make sure I don't cut into anyone else's time. So as I said, my name is Kathleen Strickland-Cohen, and I work in the Educational and Community Supports Research Unit at the University of Oregon. I also want to give a shout out today to Dr. Kathleen Kaiser. She is, her work is also represented today in the research that I will be discussing. She is a friend and colleague at TCU in Fort Worth, Texas, and this work would not have been possible without her expertise related to family and professional partnerships. So I just wanted to point out that some traditional models of family engagement have primarily framed engagement as parents or family members being actively engaged in the building through activities like volunteering at the school and attending school-sponsored events such as PTA meetings or Meet the Teacher Night. And within this framework, strategies aimed at increasing family engagement have largely focused on providing families with information. So families being passive recipients of information and providing training for parents related to practices for implementing at home for students who have more intensive support needs, for example, like Tier 3 types of supports. So by contrast, family professional partnership or family school partnership involves this reciprocal relationship and reciprocal communication with families in which both families and educators agree to build on the expertise of the other. So Turnbull and colleagues, they define some features of family professional partnership as being families being treated with equality and respect, engaging in shared decision-making and goal setting to reach valued outcomes that all parties value, forming alliances with families to create win-win solutions or strategies and solutions that work well for both school and home, parent and teachers using strengths-based collaboration, and then of course, a cornerstone of partnership is a strong communication practices. So strong communication practices that attend to both the quality and the quantity of communication between the partners. So research has shown a number of benefits related to family-school partnerships. So family-school partnership has been shown not only to improve academic outcomes and behavioral outcomes for students, but also to enhance generalization of new student skills and the consistent implementation of behavioral interventions across home and school settings. It's also been shown to be associated with the sustained implementation of school-wide systems of support, which of course is one of the reasons why we're talking about this today. So a critical feature of PBIS in particular is the inclusion of family and community stakeholders in the design and implementation of practices and systems related to PBIS. This emphasis on including family voice, along with the focus on prevention and providing effective intervention at the first signs of persistent challenging behavior, so before challenging behavior becomes more intensive over time, it allows PBIS to be uniquely suited to leverage partnership with families to support the early remediation of challenging behavior. However, a lot of the research, in fact, the majority of research has focused largely on how to support families of students with tier 3 needs, so more intensive behavior support needs. And there's less in evidence-based guidance for educators in terms of how to most effectively partner with families and use strategies that can help students with less intensive behavior support needs. So a couple of years ago, my colleague and I, Dr. Kaiser and I, conducted a study focused on examining factors that impact the quality of communication between teachers and family members, specifically as it relates to student behavior. And we held focus groups with general education teachers from 3 elementary schools and family members of their students with tier 1 and tier 2 behavior support needs. And these are some of the outcomes. This is just a small piece, but these are some of the family data that we collected. So here are some of the themes that we found. And the most common theme related to factors that helped foster this idea of working together toward a common behavioral goal. So almost 30% of the statements within this theme actually specifically focused on the use of a common language between home and school or across home and school environments, and having knowledge of the behavioral expectations across both settings. Some other themes that popped up were things like positive feedback from teachers about student behavior, regular communication about student behavior from teachers, and then also teachers being open to parent suggestions. Sorry, I got a little off track there with my clicking. So we could talk a lot actually more about this. So this was, again, like I said, just sort of a snippet of the behavior, of the data that we got from the study. And if you want to know more specifically about this study, I'm happy to share that information. Just send me an email and I'm happy to send you the article that's associated with that. But today I want to discuss how we use some of these data and information to gather, that we gathered from teachers and family members to design and pilot the Partnering for Positive Behavior planning tool. So the PPB is a planning tool for identifying mutual goals to support positive student behavior across home and school. So the PPB meeting tool, it prompts both the teacher and the family member to complete a 5-step process. I'll show you what that, or I'll give you a sense of what that tool looks like in just a moment. But the first step is in identifying student strengths. And this is, again, across both environments, defining behavioral expectations across both environments, identifying common goals and connecting those goals with the student's strengths, identifying and agreeing on behavior support strategies, something that they want to try together across both, and then a plan for follow-up communication. So how often, the preferred mode of communication, that was something that we heard families report a lot when we were talking with our focus groups, is this idea of being able to determine which mode works best for everyone. And then of course, we wanted a date for the next meeting that they were going to come back together. So this is just a little piece of the tool. It's not the whole tool, but it gives you a sense of what it looks like. So this is a form that both the family member and the teacher have when they're sitting down together, or they could do this virtually. But first, focusing again on what are, from both parties' perspective, the strengths of the students, and they can take notes on this piece. Talking about the behavioral expectations that the the teacher has in the classroom, and specific examples of what that looks like, and then asking the family member to provide that same kind of information. So getting an idea of what those expectations look like across both home and school. And then looking for areas of agreement. So looking at what they've discussed and thinking about, are there ways that we might want to focus on a particular behavior across both settings? So are there specific behaviors that they would like to see across both home and school? So like I said, that's just a piece of the tool. But we wanted to of course pilot this in an actual school setting. So my colleague and I piloted the PPB with teacher family dyads to learn if, after a 90-minute PD training on the tool and after a 90-minute PD training on the tool and meeting strategies, that the teacher would be able to lead the PPB meeting with fidelity. We also wanted to understand the extent to which the tool was perceived as acceptable, feasible, and usable by teachers and family members who participated. The family members, I will describe the participants now. So we were talking to 4, so it was a small group, but we had 4 dyads, so 8 individuals participated, 4 elementary general education teachers, and 4 family members of students who were currently receiving Tier 2 support. And in this particular case, they were, all these students were having some small group social skills lessons for their Tier 2 support. But we're still continuing to struggle a bit to meet class-wide expectations. So we, after completing the 90-minute training, the teacher did hold a meeting with the parents or family members, and we were able to audio and video record those meetings. So we weren't present in the meeting, but we did video record them. And the meetings lasted from between 26 to 38 minutes, and we scored those meetings with the videos later for procedural fidelity. We also met with and interviewed the teachers and the family members 2 to 3 weeks following the meeting to get their ideas about, again, that social validity piece. So whether or not they found it acceptable and feasible, and the extent to which they found the meeting helpful, and what aspects of the meeting they found helpful. So I want to talk a little bit through the results here. So our fidelity checks, we did find that the teachers that completed the meeting with the families were able to complete all components of the form, but we scored the fidelity in 2 different ways. So we looked not only at whether or not the pieces were conducted, or each of the pieces were conducted, but we also looked at the quality of the interaction between the parents or family members and the teachers. So for example, we didn't just score whether or not the teacher asked the parent about their expectations at home related to behavior, but also really tried to get at what are some operationally defined examples of those, or what are some observable, measurable ways that you think about that. So not that they would use those terms, but more in the terms of, what does that look like? You know, give me some examples of what that behavior would look like in your home. So fidelity scores on this piece, out of 28 possible scores, ranged from 27 to 28. Interestingly, both of the participants who scored a little bit lower missed 1 point for failing to seek family member input when discussing the student's strengths, or how those student strengths specifically might help the student to meet their behavioral goal. So obviously that's something that, now that we have seen that, we would want to highlight more in the training. itself that we provide for the staff. So this is just an example. I'm trying to be very conscious of my time today. These are a couple of the examples of the types of behaviors that were being addressed. So again, these were students who were receiving some tier 2 support already. They were continuing to struggle with particular behaviors. They were not, however, seen as students who required or needed to be referred for tier 3 support, or who needed comprehensive, individualized, or function-based plans at this point. So it's kind of stepping up our tier 2 routine a bit, but not necessarily moving into tier 3 just yet. So if you look at, for example, our first little guy here, this was the dyad number 1. This particular student was doing fairly well, but he was continuing to occasionally have some difficulty, particularly during small group instruction and also on the playground. And we found out also at home with siblings related to contexts in which he was being viewed as wrong, or told that he didn't win a particular game, or that he couldn't control the rules of the game, for example. He would get very upset. So when the teacher and the family member discussed how this was happening across both settings, they determined that they were going to focus on using I statements, or teaching the student to use I statements to express his frustration. They were also going to teach the student to use and remind him to practice on a regular basis this self-calming routine. So when he found he noticed himself getting annoyed or upset, they were going to have a common routine across home and school that they were working on. And then also they were both going to increase the amount of praise that they were giving the student on a regular basis for engaging in those behaviors. That's one example. Like I said, I'm happy to share more of these data with anyone that wants to send me an email. So in looking at the social validity results, we did end up with 13 themes across both of the groups. We found that 8 of those themes were actually consistent across both groups, so across both teachers and family members. So our consistent themes for acceptability, both groups found that this particular process facilitated collaborative problem solving. So they used terms like working as a team. They appreciated that it promoted consistency and consistent language across home and school. And it did turn out that it facilitated some ongoing communication between home and school, which we'll talk about a bit more in just a sec. In terms of usability, both parties thought that the strengths-based approach and starting with students' strengths and how they both view student strengths, and then continuing to use those strengths as they walked through the other pieces of the meeting was really helpful. They felt that that facilitated the reciprocal exchange, since the prompts asked both parties to provide their input. And then both groups appreciated the face-to-face format. So feeling like at least having that initial format was really helpful in terms of strengthening that relationship. And then finally, in terms of feasibility, both felt that the meeting was an efficient use of their time and did not require a lot in terms of preparation for the meeting. So some additional outcomes, like I said, increased interaction between family members and teachers. So when we spoke with folks 2 to 3 weeks out, all of the teacher and family member dyads had continued to have regular contact with each other after meetings, specifically around the behavior of interest. So here's just a quote from a family member. So we followed up a couple of times by phone. We'll just stick with it and keep talking back and forth. Even if we aren't able to meet face to face, we can text and be like, how's it going on your end? So while we did not at this point go in and collect our data on student behavior, which that would be a great next step, we did have some anecdotal reports of benefits to students. So 3 of the 4 dyads independently, so both teachers and family members, noted that they had seen improvements in behavior across home and school settings. So even within a couple of weeks, they were seeing some positive change. And then perhaps the best measure of social validity is that both groups indicated a desire to continue to use this process again in the future. And 2 of the teachers had already used the form itself with a couple of other parents in their classrooms. So just to sum up, so when we provide teachers with the opportunity to learn about families' experiences and expectations and their perspective, it can help teachers and educators gain critical insights into student behavior and vice versa. Family members gaining those insights as well when they're aware of what's going on in the classroom. Somebody put in the comments section in the last session something about, family members can't address what they don't understand is happening at school. And that was something that we heard over and over again in our focus groups from family members was, if we don't know what's happening at school, how can we possibly help to support positive behavior? So that's something that we heard again and again. So gaining those critical insights into student behavior from the part of families and teachers is really important. Research has also shown that having this type of perspective can increase teacher and educators' openness to parental expertise, which is really an important part of this, this type of collaboration or this type of partnering with families. And then again, we don't want to overstate the findings from our study because it was a very small sample and it was just a pilot. But we did find that the meeting facilitated back and forth dialogue, and that family members and teachers shared their behavioral expectations and observations about student behavior, and that both groups reported that this allowed them to get on the same page and to identify novel ways to address challenging behavior together across settings. So if you want to know more, like I said earlier, please, by all means, contact me, email me, and I will be happy to share any of this information with you or to expand on what we've talked about today. So I'm going to now pass this over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was wonderful to hear your project and how much overlap we have in some of our findings and goals. This is why presenting together like this is so fun. So our topic today is related to communication specifically. So we are talking about establishing ongoing communication with families through a specific strategy called positive parent contact. Next. So our agenda is that first I will be here to talk about the strategy itself, known as positive parent contact. Then I'll turn it over to one of my doctoral students, Ashley Toma, who's here with me, to talk about her dissertation work that attempted to replicate our original positive parent contact study during the COVID-19 pandemic, which provided some additional layers of challenges, but also data around how this could work. And then lastly, I'll transition over to Amanda Foley, a colleague of ours from Agawam Public Schools here in Massachusetts, who will talk about bringing this strategy into practice through her experience with this positive parent contact strategy. So the goal here is to work within triads of parents, teachers, and students to increase communication in a way that is very low demand. So I will talk more about that strategy specifically in just a moment. Next. So you're probably here investing your time and energy and listening to us share our work because you know there's a need for simple and effective Tier 2 family school partnership strategies. We certainly have heard again and again among our school partners about this need. We had the opportunity to run some focus groups with educators and with families who said pretty loud and clear that they wanted to know more about what was happening in their child's classroom, both teachers wanting to have the opportunity to communicate those things to families more easily, and families wanting to hear more about their child and their specific classroom, more so than the school-wide communications that were more well established in those schools. So that really set the foundation for us to launch this project. We know that family partnership and education are critical for promoting positive outcomes for students, including those with behavioral challenges. Unfortunately, we also know that efforts to engage families as partners are often quite demanding, with limited planning around what it takes to encourage and sustain family participation. This might be a demand on families to come into the school, give their time and energy, or it could also be a demand on teachers to really engage in practices that are likely to promote partnership that perhaps are adding to their workload in unsustainable ways. So for this reason, we've set out to create this very simple strategy. We also know from recent work that school to home communication specifically was identified as the most effective relational component of our known family school partnership interventions for outcomes across the board. Academic, social, behavioral, and mental health outcomes were all associated. Increases in those things, improvements, were all associated with this school to home communication piece specifically. So the parents in our focus groups definitely identified that. And now we have some really high quality data from this meta-analytic work that suggests, yeah, there's something about that school to home communication specific to the classroom and the child. Next. So let me tell you a little bit about what positive parent contact is. I only just realized today that we're doing PPB and then PPC all in the same presentation. So that's pretty good that we coordinated acronyms here. So PPC, positive parent contact, is a relationship-focused family engagement strategy that is very much focused on communication from school to home. There are 2 steps to this strategy. It really is this simple. Teachers are trained to catch students being good in the classroom, to look for those examples of positive behavior, and then they're asked to specifically report those positive examples to parents using their preferred communication method, which I'll get into in just a moment. As I've mentioned, this strategy is designed to be low demand and high reinforcement, focused on the positive, focused on one individual kid to increase reinforcement for teachers and for families. This is based on 2 behavior analytic concepts, response efficiency and matching law, that suggest that we as humans don't do things unless reinforcement exceeds demand. So that gives us a little bit of a reason for why family school partnership might be such a challenge for many schools and many families. Perhaps we haven't figured out this balance of high reinforcement and low demand. And that's really the premise of this strategy. So we train teachers and ask teachers to add 2 or more weekly positive communications to parents of target children using a positive shout out sample script that we'll share with you. And when I say a target child, this is a student that the teacher themselves has identified as being unresponsive to typical tier 1 universal supports. So this could be some initial indicators of classroom disengagement. This could be it's extra challenging for that teacher to reach this family, so they want to try this additional layer. We kept this quite broad for the purpose of our work thus far, as we're viewing this as kind of an entry point tier 2 strategy for those lower intensity behaviors. And that has so far worked quite well for us. We then make sure that there's no other modification made to the classroom. So not asking anything beyond this of teachers related to this specific strategy. And we make sure that parents are not asked to do anything differently. So when we see the scripts, we'll see that there's no questions or requests for responses given to parents, so that there really is 0 demand for families and very low demand for teachers, because they're supported with those scripts, and the numbers are kept quite small by viewing this as a tier 2 strategy rather than a tier 1 strategy. Next. Thank you. So I pulled this slide in here really just to highlight that this practice, this strategy, is aligned with common tier 2 features. You'll see in some of the sample scripts that we have aligned this with school-wide expectations. There's a easy, accessible part of it. There's a process or standardization. So all of these common features of tier 2 interventions show up in one way or another in this positive parent contact strategy as well. Next. So I wanted to take a moment and talk about this idea of a matched preference assessment, or at least that's what I'm calling it within the context of positive parent contact. So first, we ask teachers to select their top preferred methods of communication, 3 or 4 things that they are willing to do to reach out to families. And then from that list, we ask the parent to specifically identify one strategy that is their top preference to ensure that the specific communication strategy used for those positive shout outs is preferred and accessible by both parties. So in our initial study, it was very interesting that all of the triads selected email as their preferred method. So the initial study that we're talking about and the follow-up study that Ashley will talk about both used email as the primary method of communication. Next. So here's an example of a sample script at a school that had care expectations. So you can see that the sample script is aligned with those tier 1 expectations, but is specific to this student. On the post-it notes on this slide, we have the specific guidelines that we give to teachers to structure up this particular intervention. So we want to make sure that the behavior specific praise given in these emails is genuine and specific, is linked to those tier 1 PBIS expectations, is varied. They switch it up each day or each time they make a contact, as I mentioned, 2 or more times a week, and no demand. And of course, we want them to use what they caught the student being good for in this report to families. So real classroom examples of positive behavior. Next. So here we have a couple more sample scripts from a school that we work with. There is a handout available that has many more sample scripts that are a starting point for you to begin modifying this for your own PBIS expectations for alignment. We hope that those are helpful and allow you to bring this practice into your school. So at this point, I'm going to transition to Ashley Toma, who will talk about her dissertation work. You can go ahead and go to the next slide for us. Great. So Ashley's goal was to replicate our original study, which Ashley was also a part of, which found positive effects for positive parent contact on student on-task behavior and promising effects that suggested that when teachers did this type of outreach, there was more reciprocal communication. So despite no demand, families were responding to the emails and engaging in reciprocal communication after these positive shout outs were sent. So Ashley then designed a study. This was designed pre-COVID, so some of these things shifted and changed, as she'll talk about. And her study was designed to better understand why these effects may have been demonstrated. So not only to show similar effects, hopefully, on student outcomes, but to better understand why an intervention that does not include students at all, it's between school and home communication, may have had an effect on on-task behavior specifically. So take it away, Ashley.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Kathleen, for laying some of the foundational elements here for me, as well as the strand before us. That was a fantastic presentation. If you weren't able to attend, I encourage you to watch the recording. They also laid some foundational things for us there and appreciated their shout outs on the importance of communication between home and school. So yes, as Sarah mentioned, this study that I'll be discussing did take place this past spring of 21. Roughly the timeline was about March to June, June ending naturally with the school year. So we were able to recruit 3 triads of parent, student, and teacher participants. And so you'll see those demographics broken down a little bit more here. All 3 of the teachers did have their master's degree and had 10 plus years of experience. Also, like, major shout out to them for taking on an extra project during COVID. So they were definitely like willing and motivated. So yes, shout out to them. Our 3 students here, so Ian did have a formal diagnosis of ADHD as reported by his adopted mother. Our other 2 Thank you. Our other two participants, their mothers completed the demographic form, and they reported that although there was no formal diagnosis, there was a suspicion of some ADHD for both of those participants. So all three students engaged in some off-task behavior, a little bit more passively though. They were not considered disruptive students, again, fitting within that tier 2 framework. And then the parents, all three were mothers that happened to respond to the demographic form, all identified as Caucasian and reported they were married. Thank you. Awesome. So I wanted to discuss a little bit more of the context with spring of 21. As you can imagine, there are some extra complications there, but we also liked to find some of the positives, right? So there was a little bit of additional motivation to engage and enhance those family school relationships due to COVID. I think teachers and schools were really wanting to know more of what was going on at home, finding new and creative ways to support students in our new world, and really boosting up that communication. But it was also so needed at that time. Of course, there are also challenges doing this work during COVID. So the school district was actively switching between being fully virtual, implementing a hybrid model, and then being fully in person. So those shifts were taking place right around that March timeline when we began. So it was interesting to do some recruitment in this context. I do want to mention though that this study was conducted in the district with well-established PBIS. So they had this commitment, it was pre-existing, written in their school improvement plan that they wanted to really focus on increasing family school partnerships. It was a goal already set. And I think Sarah mentioned this as well, that some of these conversations for the study to take place in this district took place prior to COVID. So they were also wonderful working with us and making some of those adaptations. Another important thing to note about the replication study this past spring is that there was not a preference assessment offered. There were multiple reasons for this. One being the district preferences. The district wanted to only use certain platforms, and I needed to collect hard copies, permanent products, because I wanted to be able to review those and to be able to score them, really make sure that the teachers were following along the kind of guidelines that we laid out for the contacts. So between the district preferences, documentation needs, and then some COVID restrictions, another thing is it couldn't really be in a notebook because there was no way for me to then read the notebook and see, but that could be a potentially great option for those of you who are interested in using the study in the future, or the intervention in the future. Next slide, please. Thank you. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a little bit of the timeline and some of the logistics of just kind of how we got started with this. So as I mentioned, the district communicated a goal of increasing family school partnerships within MTSS. That was already a goal that they had established and communicated with us, as there was a well-established partnership between UMass Amherst and Agawam Public Schools at the time, or still. And so this conversation started in about February and March of 2019, and it definitely came to a little bit of a pause up until last fall. And when that was the time we established a relationship with the behavior specialist who's joined us here today, it's Amanda. You'll hear from her in a little while. I would truly have nothing to present today if it was not for Amanda. So major shout out to all of her massive efforts to helping this study happen at all. So thank you, Amanda. So one of her major roles was the teacher identification process and recruitment. So she was very thoughtful in identifying teachers across the 2 elementary schools that she was supporting, identifying teachers that were likely to want to do this. Taking on additional workload during COVID is, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just fantastic that they were able to do that. So motivated teachers, also teachers this is going to be an alignment for them. That wasn't something totally outside of their wheelhouse. So not expecting any kind of pushback. So we did begin with 4 potential teacher participants, and we held a meeting with the district administrator, behavior specialists, other counselors, as well across the 2 schools. And I presented more about the logistics of the study, some more of the expectations, the timeline of it, the vision of it, all things like that. And after the meeting, I did follow up with those teachers via email, and assessed if there were any questions, concerns, things like that, had some conversations. And one of the teachers did decide that right now wasn't the best time for her. Totally understandable. So the 3 teachers moved forward and completed the consents. After that, through a lot of thought with this portion of the process, me being an outsider of the school building and wanting to be very respectful of people's privacy, the teachers actually nominated their student and individually contacted parents to request written consent to then be connected to me. So we kind of took that additional step in the middle there to make sure that parents felt comfortable and had some interest before they were connected to me. I did provide the teachers with a script to send to the parents. That way, everyone was receiving the same information and also accurate information too. So that I think that was helpful. So after parents said yes, they were interested in learning more, they were connected with me. We communicated more, and then consents were sent and obtained. And as soon as we got consents obtained, we began observations immediately, just because of the timeline was being a little bit snug in the spring there. So yeah, thank you. So after the observations began, I did hold an individual virtual meeting that was about 45 minutes with each teacher. And the slide that you see here, and actually the next slide as well that I'll talk about in a minute, were slides that I showed the teachers, just really trying to help them understand what we're looking for and some of the thought process behind the intervention. And so like I said, I met with all of them individually and went over these things and talked about behavior specific praise and relationships. And I got to know more about why they nominated their students and what they were seeing in the classroom, what some of their concerns were, and what their relationship was like. Sarah very nicely highlighted some of the relationship pieces and how that's important here. And we were very lucky that all three students and teachers had fantastic relationships already in existence. So they were reporting very positive relationships from the beginning. So there was already some of that catching them being good, already trying to provide some good feedback. Once again, the school has well implemented PBIS. And so they were already doing some of those things. And then it was also important for them to be communicating real and positive examples to the parent to ensure that each contact is genuine. The genuine piece came up in a few areas there. So definitely something we want to highlight. Thank you. So these expectations for contact, Sarah had a similar slide a little bit earlier. The only difference I want to highlight is down here at the bottom. So adding the primary investigator to the email via BCC. This was requested so that way I could read and score the contacts on our rubric, which is on the next slide, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. So this is our communication scoring rubric. This is uploaded in our files tab as well for anyone interested in using it. So this breaks down those components, really looking at behaviors, being behavior specific. Was it genuine? Was it linked to the PBIS school expectations? Things like that. So of all of the emails that I was included on, they met the full criteria. The teachers really did a fantastic job. There were no concerns throughout, but I do also think it would have allowed me being included on the emails would have allowed for, if I felt like something was off, it could have provided for in the moment feedback. And so I think that was a good choice there. We enjoyed that part of it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these two here are actual emails that were sent. These are pseudonyms. They're not actual student names. But wanted to highlight these for you. So it says, "Hi, I just wanted to reach out and let you know how respectful Ian has been in the classroom today. He's been wonderful at following through with directions and was able to listen calmly to feedback regarding his behavior. This is something Ian has been working really hard on, and I wanted to share his progress." So that's our participant 1. And an email example for participant 2 is that, "Hi, I wanted to share some good news about Eric that I thought you would appreciate. He did an amazing job working with his partner during math class today. We buddied up at a distance," there's our COVID context again, "to work through some math word problems. He cooperated and helped his partner, and they solved each math problem together. This behavior has a positive impact in math because he was able to work on kindness through working with his friend. This is something we love to see from our students. Have a great weekend." So both of these emails here are just fantastic. I mean, if you receive that as a parent, I can imagine it would brighten your day, and that's some feedback we'll get into more as well. But I did notice that most of the emails, the first sentence or two, and then usually like the last sentence or two, came from the scripts that were provided. And so in the closing interview with the teachers, all 3 of them reported how helpful the scripts were. Just a really good starting point to get some inspiration. So that was unanimous feedback as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So diving a little bit more into teacher feedback, Teachers reported that they enjoyed the intervention and felt that it was feasible. Definitely reported that they are going to incorporate more positive emails to parents in the future. All stated that they agreed or strongly agreed to it being relatively easy to implement the intervention and that the intervention was well worth their time and effort. All teachers also agreed that they would recommend this to other teachers, schools, and classrooms for use of this intervention. And here we are, recommending it to you all. Next slide, please. Thank you. Some teacher quotes. I definitely wanted to highlight these. So the teacher, we collected social validity data, which is kind of where they were ranking strongly agree, things like that on a Likert scale, and then more open-ended questions. So these were some direct quotes from the closing interview. One teacher stated it was beneficial for me because it encouraged me to have more parent contact. Another stated I was more intentional and dedicated the time to writing positive shout outs to parents. That teacher in particular really felt like this was something she wanted to do, but hadn't really sat down and made the time for it. So the intervention gave her an opportunity to be more intentional. Another teacher stated that I was excited when the parent would reply because before she wouldn't really respond to my emails. That's just an awesome quote right there. We're happy to hear that there was an increase in that reciprocal communication. Lastly, a teacher stated, I felt that he was more motivated to do well. He would ask if I would send an email to his mom that day to tell her that he did good. And I will be referencing that last one again in a couple of slides when we talk about the student feedback. Next slide. Thank you. All right, checking the time here. So student data. So our student data, although it's a little bit unclear across the phases and across the participants, our participant one up there, Ian, shows some really promising effects. And it's important to note he was actually at a different school. And this teacher here just had some fantastic fidelity, was very much on top of everything with the intervention and did a great job. She also had a little bit more time, like I said, with the school year coming to a close. So Ian was able to get additional contacts there. But definitely the importance of fidelity. We did see an immediacy of effect between the phases. So baseline to intervention, there's definitely a little increase there for all three of them, which is great to see. And then I did some calculations, just the average between baseline and intervention. And there was, it's minor. It's not anything, a huge increase, but it is an increase across baseline and intervention for all three of them. Yes, so perfect, thank you. We're good. All right. So some parent and student feedback. So in a closing interview, I pulled some additional quotes here as well, but wanted to just highlight that for the reciprocal communication piece, it definitely did seem that there was an increase in communication. Parents replied to approximately 70% of the emails that were sent, and that's across the triads there. The parent reported that receiving the emails boosted her mood and often made her day. She stated that she absolutely enjoyed them, felt like it was nice to know when things were going well. And the parent actually stated that they would hold family meetings to read and discuss the positive email. I know that there were some questions in the chat about whether or not students knew about these emails. So teachers were not telling the students directly, but through these interviews and closing out, it did seem like the parents were reporting it to the students, which is really good information for us moving forward as far as thinking more about our mechanism of change. And so the student, total sweetheart, a little quiet, but the information we did get from him is that he was really trying to earn those positive emails. He was hoping that it was being sent, which links back to that teacher quote 2 slides ago, that he was asking and looking for that positive email to be sent to his parents to get some of that positive praise. So overall, again, it's a small sample size, and we're still figuring out some of the moving pieces and the mechanism of change, but definitely got some really positive feedback from parents, teachers, and students, and are really excited to take this information and to help us move forward. So I believe I'm turning it over to Amanda next to talk about bringing this into everyday school practices. And again, thank you, Amanda, for all of your help.
No problem. I was happy to do it. I think we can go ahead. Okay, so my role in the district last year was as a behavior interventionist. So I've been supporting in the district for the last 4 years as an interventionist. And my job really entails supporting the teachers and counselors in the elementary school buildings in implementing tier 1, 2, and 3 behavior strategies. I do support the counselors with the whole school PBIS Tier 1 strategies, but predominantly my role is to observe and students who are demonstrating Tier 2 and 3 behaviors, and work with the teachers to model behavior strategies within the classroom to support students, as well as creating behavior intervention plans. So this part of my role has been working with teachers to observe students and observe behaviors within the classroom. So when Ashley and Sarah we're looking for someone to support with that piece. It fit right along with my role last year. So being able to go into the classrooms to observe students is very much something that the students in the school are used to seeing me. So it was good that my being in the classroom didn't have an impact on student behavior, positive or negative. So my job, as well as another school counselor and lead teacher, were able to support me as well, being that we did want to complete a lot of observations in a short time. And we were able to track all the on-task and off-task data of students in 30-minute intervals. And we were able to work with the teachers on implementing those tier 2 strategy and Tier 1 strategy of sending home that positive parent contact and being able to connect Ashley with the teachers in the classroom. And this year, my role is a little bit different in the district. I'm not now just supporting in one school as a lead teacher, working more with Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategies this year. The study had a lot of glows that we've continued to utilize this year as well. It was great to have that immediate data. It was easy to share. Ashley had created a really user-friendly Google form, so we were able to implement the data right after the observations. It was easy to be able to share with Ashley, as well as to be able to give immediate feedback to the teachers, which could then be shared with the parents. It was easy to implement, and that there was, a team of people that were supporting. So the teacher's, role was, really just to be able to send that positive feedback, on their own time. And it didn't require the teachers to have something additional in their day. We did select teachers to start that were familiar with utilizing positive parent contact, and it was really helpful to be able to utilize that teacher feedback this year to continue to share this strategy with other teachers. It was very supportive of relationships with parents, student, and staff. And it did reinforce the effectiveness of that behavior-specific praise, which we are, constantly trying to utilize in the classroom. And we were able to increase staff buy-in by nominating teachers who could share with other staff, and teachers who we knew would share how positive this was for their classroom. So we were able to increase the staff buy-in across the board. And moving forward in trying to implement at Tier 1 and 2 this year, we looking more at creating a schedule for observations. There were times where we'd go to observe a student, perhaps they were in the classroom, they might have had special, so being able to ensure that the staff and students were available. We didn't want to observe at a time when the teacher was not the person supporting in the classroom. Utilizing multiple students to participate moving forward. Being that it was COVID, we did not necessarily have the time to have as many students as we would have liked, and being able to communicate with the teacher consistently. So creating a schedule for that communication, and being able to schedule when someone is observing to have that consistency would be really helpful as well. Okay, so this year in my current role, we're continuing to, as a district, to move forward with as much positive parent contact and creating those opportunities for family engagement. So we've actually created ways to utilize the positive parent contact as both a Tier 2 and 3 strategy. And then we've also are utilizing a practice for a whole school component this year as well. So in tier 3, we incorporate the strategy as part of individual student wellness plans. Having it be a goal for the teacher to initiate positive parent contacts with the family 2 to 3 times a week. And we also are identifying the parent preference. Would they prefer a phone call? Would they prefer to receive an email or share the positive contact through a classroom app? And being able to share those similar scripts with the teacher so they can easily identify the behavior specific praise and be easily able to put that into their script and send it to the parents 2 times per week, and measuring how that's impacting the student behavior in the classroom. And then at the tier 1 level for all students, we are utilizing our Clark positive rings, and my previous school had called them sunshine calls. So when a teacher or staff catches someone being good, we have our Clark keys demonstrating our key basic beliefs at the school. Then a staff member could fill out one of these positive rings and send it to the principal, the counselor, or myself. And we go to the classroom to share with the entire class what their peer did. And it's hung up on a bulletin board. And then we also call and or email the family to share the positive news. So far, I've probably made about 10 calls this year, and parents are initially caught off guard. They're always asking, did they miss the bus? So, they're assuming that, initially that it's something that has went wrong, but they've been super happy to hear the positive feedback and excited. And students are actively, asking, how can I earn something? Or, how can I earn a phone call home? So the students are really excited about that component as well, more so than the sticker and pencil that they get that goes along with it. They're really enjoying that positive feedback at home. And similar to what Ashley said, it provides a good talking point for parents who have given feedback. Like, a lot of times students are saying they did nothing at school, but having that kind of conversation opener has helped to, guide those parent conversations at home as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda, for helping us see how this strategy can be absorbed into school practices. When you're a PBIS school, there's lots of ways to insert positive parent contact into routines. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. I encourage you to think about how to put this strategy into action in your school. What can you do to enhance communication between teachers and families? Perhaps this strategy is one that you could consider among others that hopefully you are using already. We welcome questions and comments, and do not forget to complete that evaluation so that we can get your feedback. So great questions that I'm seeing related to screening for receiving positive parent contact as a tier 2 intervention. We did not, in our initial 2 studies that we've shared here, specifically do any sort of screening. As we've mentioned, it was teacher nomination of students who were viewed by the teacher as not being responsive to tier 1. So any student who was exhibiting low rate challenging behaviors, any sort of classroom non-engagement, those are the types of prompts that we were giving to teachers to support them in their nomination process for students at tier 2. Teachers appreciated being empowered to make a decision about the family and student that they were specifically targeting with this intervention. So I think that part has worked so far. And as a next step, definitely structuring up that identification process using some of our screening methods that we know work in the context of other tier 2 interventions would make a lot of sense. Right now, I'm thinking a whole lot about the October catch and those students with a couple office discipline referrals, and that might be a really nice way to identify students who could benefit from this intervention as well. And then other questions about graduating or graduation criteria. I love that folks are asking that. Clearly, we've got some experts in tier 2 interventions here. So far, we have run both studies in the spring. So we have not graduated students. We've actually run right into the end of the school year with doing these positive parent contacts. However, one of the reasons why we are incorporating these classroom observations, which occur specifically during challenging classroom routines, is because we want to know whether or not classroom behavior is improving as a way to determine how long we actually need to do this intervention. That's one of the many questions that remains to be answered for this specific strategy. We are very preliminary in our research work on this specific strategy. There's many more folks implementing it in practice. However, we really need to know more about why it works in terms of the classroom behavior outcomes, as well as how to embed it truly into a tier 2 system, which would include identification and graduation criteria. Great questions. So we'll now open it up to questions about either presentation. Great, it sounds like those are all the questions for now. Feel free to type more into polls or the chat, and we're happy to answer them. All right, so a question about how this could work at tier 3. I think Amanda's example from the wellness plan, using this as a proactive or antecedent strategy as part of a comprehensive behavior plan, makes a lot of sense. I think either tool or strategy that we shared today could absolutely be relevant for tier 3, and would just be modified in terms of identification of students. Students with more intensive needs could certainly benefit from positive parent contacts as well.
And I know that this was not, I think that it's also fair to say that the work that we are doing could, hopefully you're able to see how it could easily be translated at tier 3. So when we're looking at trying to develop those plans with families and parents, when you are thinking about a more comprehensive plan, also having some of that continuity between home and school, and having a good sense of what the values and expectations of families are across environments can be incredibly important.
Yes, and I apologize. I was just going to add in this with the students that we're utilizing it that have more specific tier 3 intervention plans. It really does help to streamline the communication in terms of the teacher being able to deliver that positive behavior specific praise during the week. And we've been able to streamline how the parents are receiving information about behaviors that might have been more concerning, or behaviors that have been identified as problem behaviors, and allowing the teacher to share that positive information to continue to build that relationship, and not necessarily feeling like they're continuing to have to share information that perhaps the parents aren't wanting to hear on a daily basis. So it's allowed us to kind of streamline the communication. This is who is going to share this information. The teacher will continue to work on building the positive relationship.
And I see a question about admin buy-in. In the 2 districts that we've run studies related to positive parent contact in so far, it was not a hard sell. We specifically worked with these districts because they had district and school improvement plans that labeled family school partnership as a goal, as well as MTSS or PBIS work as goals. So in those particular districts, when we approached them with this simple strategy for teachers specifically, they were quite motivated to figure out how to make it work in their schools, including looping Amanda, behavior specialist, into the conversations and really thinking carefully about where it would fit and how it would fit best. And as Amanda said, then targeting teachers to start with who have some social capital, who are going to be most likely to share the successes or share the ease with which they use the strategy with their teacher colleagues. So that was really essential for buy-in for us.
I did see a question come through too about asking if there was any support to teachers to help them find a range of positives. Yes, there was. This looked at like in a few different ways. One being that teacher meeting that I held with them prior to them starting sending any positive contacts, really reviewing behavior specific praise and things like that, and encouraging them to think about, if the student was having a rough day, like there's, thankfully there's 2 contacts in a week. So also encouraging them to utilize a different day if need be, but encouraging them to look for even small things, small moments of being helpful, small moments of, being prepared or getting in a line quickly or things like that. But I hope that and I believe that the teachers and hopefully you all will find the scripts helpful. There were some ideas in there just to kind of connect it back to PBIS and just positive general shout outs as well. So encourage you to take a look at the script document and provide that to others if you're looking for some inspiration on positive shout outs.
I noticed another question asking about the possibility of across grades as students transition, that perhaps by communicating only positive things, we could be giving a misperception to families that their student was very well behaved in grade 1, let's say, when they were on positive parent contact strategy or receiving that strategy. And then in grade 2, all of a sudden they start hearing about challenging behaviors and are surprised by it. That is an excellent question, and one that we have not yet run into and very well could and might need to plan around. One piece that I think has been very important in helping this strategy go well is that it is framed as a tier 2 strategy. So when we're inviting parents to participate in the research and when we're communicating with parents about expectations around communication, it is mentioned that the student was identified by the teacher due to challenging classroom behavior or due to high rates of off-task behavior or whatever it was that the teacher communicated to us for that nomination. So there is context behind this positive parent contact and that they know that their student was identified due to some additional needs for intervention beyond tier 1.
And I would also say that would be an excellent opportunity to be able to share with the following year's teacher. For example, we use the term wellness plans, in our district, but the wellness plans are always typically shared year to year. So to be able to share feedback from a previous teacher that this was a strategy that was really effective and helpful, for this student in supporting positive behaviors, I think is always an excellent jumping point, for teachers to know that a strategy was already in place and working.
Just a moment, please.
Excellent questions. Thank you for these. Keep them coming if you have them. We have a few minutes left, and don't forget to fill out that evaluation as well. I see a question. Did other school individuals beyond teachers nominate students? Amanda, in her role as behavior specialist, certainly played a role in nominating both teachers and students for the intervention. I think there's lots of possibilities for how other folks could get involved in identification. In both of the studies, we did follow the teacher's lead for nominating families and students to participate, though. And in terms of research on linguistically diverse families, I can speak for our positive parent contact study, the 2 studies that have been done. Unfortunately, neither sample have been very diverse at all. Interestingly, in one of the debriefing interviews that we did for the first study with the teacher, she had indicated one teacher of this multiple baseline design across 4 teachers indicated that she was using this with several of her families who were from China and establishing really nice new relationships with those families through positive communication. She indicated that she was using this strategy with those families because she was unsure and not so confident with communicating with those families within her classroom. And that is a really wonderful point of feedback that we hope to build upon through further research and do some targeted recruitment efforts to begin to answer that excellent question that you've posed.
And I want to speak for our sample as well. We did have a diverse sample, but they were not linguistically diverse. And I agree with what you're saying, Sarah, in terms of that being a really important piece of this research is thinking about how we're communicating with families for whom English may not be their first language.
And just to say a little bit more about that question, one of my doctoral students who's currently in the planning phase for his dissertation is very interested in whether or not priming teachers to catch students being good and then communicating those positives to families could be a bias reduction strategy in and of itself. So I look forward to supporting him in this dissertation research because it's a question that I think is an excellent one. And I really look forward to hearing more from him about his ideas about how to evaluate that. It is a hard question to answer, especially because bias is a very hard thing to measure. But his conceptualization and where he's drawing from in terms of social psychology research is fascinating. And I'm really curious to know more about the possibility of this type of strategy focused on positive communication being a potential bias reduction strategy for teachers when they're working with diverse students and families. Thank you for all of the praise and thank yous in the chat. You're welcome. We're happy to talk more about this. As Kathleen mentioned, definitely reach out to us if you do have questions, if you want more information, if you want to see the published work in this area or know more about Ashley's hopefully soon to be published dissertation. So yes, please feel free to reach out with additional questions. This has been great.